Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, my name is Hergianti Puspita Dewi, and today I would like to present about 20th century in English literature. Early 20th century. The 20th century began on January 1st, 1901 and ended on December 31, 2000. It was the 10th and final century of the second millennium. The roots of modern literature are in the late 19th century. In 1910, the modernist movement began to influence British literature. Romanticism was a short-lived modernist movement in British art and poetry of the early 20th century. The World War One produced major shifts in attitudes toward Western myths of progress and civilization. Capitalism came into its monopoly stage in Britain. The sharpened contradictions between socialist productions and the private ownership causes frequent economic depressions and mass unemployment. It greatly slowed down the speed of the British economic development. The 20th century witnessed the emergence of internationally claimed voices from the former imperial domination. Second World War. The Second World War marked the last stage of the disintegration of the British Empire. Britain suffered heavy losses in the war, thousands of people killed, and the economy ruined. Innovation and change. Due to continuing industrialization and expanding trade, many significant changes of the century were, directly or indirectly, economic and technological in nature. Inventions such as the light bulb, the automobile, and the telephone in the late 19th century, followed by the supertankers, airliners, motorways, radio, television, antibiotics, nuclear power, frozen food, computers and microcomputers, the Internet, and mobile telephones affected people's quality of life across the developed world. Scientific research, engineering professionalization, and technological development, much of it motivated by the Cold War arms race, drove change in everyday life. General characteristic of 20th century literature. The 20th century was like no time period before it. Einstein, Darwin, Freud, and Marx were just some of the thinkers who profoundly changed Western culture. This change took distinct shape in the literature of the 20th century. Modernism, a movement that was a radical break from 19th century Victorianism, led to postmodernism, which emphasized self-consciousness and pop art. While 20th century literature is a diverse field covering a variety of genres, there are common characteristics in 20th century. First, fragmented structure. Prior to 20th century, literature tended to be structured in linear, chronological order. 20th century writers experimented with other kinds of structure. The second is fragmented perspective. Modernist and postmodern writers believe that this did a disservice to the reliability of stories in general. The 20th century saw the birth of the ironic narrator who could not be trusted with the facts of narrative. The third is individualism. In this era, the individual is more interesting than society. Specifically, modernist writers were fascinated with how the individual adapted to the changing world. In some cases, the individual triumphed over obstacles. For the most part, modernist literature featured characters who just kept their heads above water. Writers presented the world or society as a challenge to the integrity of their characters. The fourth is experimentation. Writers broke free of old forms and techniques. Both abandoned traditional rhyme schemes and wrote in free verse. Novels defied all expectation. Writers mixed images from the past with modern language and themes. creating a college of styles. The inner workings of consciousness were a common subject for modernists. This preoccupation led to a form of narration called stream of consciousness, where the point of view of the novel meanders in a pattern resembling human thought. The fifth is absurdity. The carnage of the Second World War profoundly affected writers of the period. Several great English poets died or were wounded in World War One. At the same time, global capitalism was reorganizing society at every level. For many writers, the war was becoming a more absurd place every day. The mysteriness of life was being lost in the trash of daily life. The senseless violence of World War II was yet more evidence that humanity had lost its way. The sixth is symbolism. The modernist writer infused objects, people, places, and even with significant meanings. They imagine a reality with multiple layers, many of them hidden, or in a sort of code. The idea of a poem as a riddle to be cracked had its beginning in the modernist period. Symbolism was not a new concept in literature, but the modernist particular use of symbolism was an innovation. They left much more to readers' imagination than earlier writers, leading to open-ended narrative with multiple interpretations. The seventh is formalism. Writers of the modern period saw literature more as a craft than a flowering of creativity. They believed that poems and novels were constructed from smaller parts instead of the organic, internal process that early generations had described. The idea of literature as craft fed the modernist desire for creativity and originality. Modernist poetry often includes foreign language, dense vocabulary, and invented words. Second World War. The Second World War marked the last stage of the disintegration of the British Empire. Britain suffered heavy losses in the war, thousands of people killed, and the economy ruined. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Great Gatsby is a 1925 novel written by American author F. Scott Fitzgerald that follows a cast of characters living in the fictional towns of West Egg and East Egg on prosperous Long Island in the summer of 1922. Many literary critics consider The Great Gatsby to be one of the greatest novels ever written. The story of the book primarily concerned the young and mysterious millionaire Jay Gatsby and his quixotic passion and obsession to reunite with his ex-lover, the beautiful former debutante Daisy Buchanan. Considered to be Fitzgerald's magnum opus, The Great Gatsby explores themes of decadence, idealism, resistance to change, social upheaval, and excess, creating a portrait of the Roaring Twenties that has been described as a cautionary tale regarding the American dream. To the Lighthouse is a 1927 novel by Virginia Woolf. The novel centers on the Ramsay family and their visits to the Isle of Skye in Scotland between 1910 and 1920. Following and extending the tradition of modernist novelists like Marcel Proust and James Joyce, the plot of the Lighthouse is secondary to its philosophical introspection. Cited as a key example of the literary technique of multiple focalization, the novel includes little dialogue and almost no action. Most of it is written as thought and observation. The novel recalls childhood emotions and highlights adult relationships. Among the book's many tropes and themes are those of lost subjectivity, the nature of art, and the problem of perception. This is the end of my presentation about 20th century in English literature. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good day.